Well, let's find out more about SANZAF then, the South African National Zakah Fund, and their role, and particularly their role well, throughout the year, but certainly so in Ramadan because of the link up with the work that defines their very name, Zakah. Right. So with me is Yasmina Francke, who's the CEO of SANZAF. Yasmina, appreciate your time. Salaam alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran for having me on your show, Ashraf, to you and the listeners.
Thank you so much. So yeah, let's talk. I mean, I think we know what SANZAF does, but I mean, am I right in saying that particularly in Ramadan, it has to be a complete switch on because of the fact that Zakah defines what you do, right?
Yes, it is. Alhamdulillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, shukran, Ashraf. Absolutely. I think SANZAF is known for the collection and distribution of Zakah. And I think in the month of Ramadan, many of the kind of generous South Africans and those who are fully aware of the importance of paying Zakah and the importance of, charity during the month of Ramadan, all of that seems to come together every year during this month, alhamdulillah. And so, as you mentioned, we do prepare ourselves for a month of high activity. But more importantly, we also try and preempt the month and the demand for our services, in the sense that we precursor this with a lot of Zakah advocacy and Zakah training, which has happened from before Ramadan, and it continues during the month of Ramadan. And that's an important component because we speak within these Zakah training and Zakah workshops. We speak to the importance, but we also speak to the practical aspect of how to calculate your Zakah.
And when you have this advocacy, who do you address? Is it the ulama? Is it the mosque? Is it Islamic institutions, or is it the public? Is it people like myself?
So it's a combination. So in most cases, it is the public, but we have had sessions with ulama, also just as a refresher. And so it's a combination, but we try and cover a broad spectrum because I think it's important that we just keep the topic of Zakah, because, where we're standing, and from our perspective, it is a neglected pillar of Islam, to the extent of, how much effort people put into learning about Zakah, understanding Zakah. And in actual fact, if you look at the proportion of time you spend on focusing on your wealth, calculating what you have, how you're managing it, all of that, versus the proportion of time you spend on educating yourself on how and what the responsibilities are with that wealth. So it's quite important that we play that part of advocacy when it comes to educating everybody on Zakah, because we know what the power of Zakah is and what the ability it has in terms of economic and social justice. But more importantly, Ashraf, in our local context, in South Africa, I mean, everybody that lament about the poverty levels, I mean, I'm just echoing that, in that, there are 1 in every 2 households who are living in poverty, if we look at the stats. And I mean, it's close to 50%, which means 1 in every 2 households, there's either somebody who are unemployed, or somebody who has lost their job, or somebody who's struggling from a kind of survival entrepreneurial perspective. So I think it's a reality. And if the other 50%, alhamdulillah, is in a better position and everybody pays their Zakah, then, we would be in a better position to be kind of breaking the cycle, inshallah. So
but why do you think? Okay, so in that case, why do you think? You mentioned that Zakah is oft neglected. So considering it's a pillar of Islam, why do you think in your research is it neglected in South Africa?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. I think there's just so much focus on the other pillars because they affect us more frequently, probably more on a daily basis. If you look at your Salah, you perform Salah 5 times a day. If you think of the Ramadan, it's 30 days of Ramadan, and it affects you deeply in the sense that every person performs that form of ibadah. When it comes to Zakah, there are many conditions before Zakah becomes eligible to be paid by the individual. And often, because of those conditions, you somehow filter through those conditions and feel that some of those conditions I don't satisfy. So then I sort of move on, and it's about understanding that, and then also beyond zakah, looking at if I perhaps don't qualify to pay zakah, but I would like to have the benefit of assisting somebody else, and perhaps I've had a windfall once in the year, perhaps a bonus, perhaps something that I didn't expect. Then there's the option of sadaqah and lillah, which is also a good form of assistance to help us, organizations such as ourselves, to build the capacity to assist throughout the year. But when you come and you reflect, Ashraf, think about when you were in madrasa in your young years, and how much of your madrasa book you were taught about zakah. You were probably taught it's paid once every year, and you were probably taught that you pay 2.5%. And that probably was the extent of what the general knowledge is around zakah. So I think that's why we also incorporate our programs when we speak to the ulama, is also just to get them to look at their own syllabi and to also look at how they can incorporate at madrasa level and expand the knowledge. Because if you expand the knowledge, you create an inquiring mind. And if the youngster learns about zakah, knows that zakah is also a farl, and they reach that age where they've or that stage in their life where they've graduated, become a professional, start earning money, and have accumulated some wealth, that which they've learned at school at a young age will come to fore, and they will start asking those questions. And also in a household, we know how we teach our children habits. If as parents we do that, they become conscious about it, and it becomes a lifestyle thing. And so I think that's what we need to encourage as well. So the advocacy is about building the consciousness, but also building the understanding of the power, what it can actually do, because this is a model of poverty alleviation, which was created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's his model. So it definitely has value.
I think you're spot on there. Well, I mean, to answer that first question about how often in madrasa did I get taught about it, yeah, probably once or twice. I think you're spot on there. Now we know that. I mean, perhaps you can. My sense is that statistically, the vast majority of people pay their zakah in Ramadan. I don't have facts, but it's anecdotal, right? Why is that the case, right? Well, two things. Well, maybe three. One is, why is that the case? Number two, what percentage, let's say, of collections of zakah the SANZAF receive in Ramadan? And thirdly, why in Ramadan, considering if they want to peg it to a new year, that the new year starts in Muharram and not in Ramadan?
So if I can just, tackle each question. So the first one, the easy one, the percentage. So it's in excess of 50%. So
Okay.
kind of more than half. And I think the reason for Ramadan is everybody know that the reward in the month of Ramadan, and Allah grants us that, is manifold, right? So if you know that you need to pay zakah, but one of the conditions of paying zakah is that you must own the nisab for a 12 lunar month. So when you've reached the nisab, which is that minimum threshold, which may have been Muharram, as you say, or it could have been any month, and you've looked in your calendar and it was the 1st of March, and you looked at the Islamic month associated with that, and let's say it happens to be the 1st of Rabiul Awal. That is your whole. So you carry that date for yourself, and next year, the 1st of Rabiul Awal, you will now see whether you still, what your wealth is, and that would become your payment date. But why people tend to do it in Ramadan is because of the rewards being manifold. But what they tend to do is they pay a portion, because you more or less know your wealth, and you know whether you have policies, whether you have investments, whether you have, kind of savings accounts. So you can do your calculation 2.5% of that and pay a portion in Ramadan. But then when you're Rabiul Awal or your 1st of Muharram, whichever is your date, which is your whole and your payment calendar, when that date comes along, a lot of people do the recon. So they say, I've paid in Ramadan, and I made mania that would be part of my zakah. And then they do a recon, and they see they've either overpaid or they've underpaid, depending on what happened to their wealth in that time. So if you've overpaid, alhamdulillah, you you can decide that you will kind of even it at that point, or it can go towards the next cycle. If you've underpaid, then you obviously have to pay in the difference. So it's 50% that we collect, alhamdulillah, and also Ramadan specifically because of, I think it's also the sensitivity being created by many of the organizations making the appeals, but more so about the rewards that's multiplied.
Yeah. But I mean, so here's an example. Assuming that your Zakah calculation works out that you need to pay 10,000 rands, right? That's obviously based upon a whole year, as you've just mentioned, right? But at this point in time in Ramadan, maybe you've only got 2,000 rand cash available. I mean, you could technically, if what you're saying is that you could technically commit to 10,000, but pay the 10,000 monthly, as opposed to paying it in one shot.
Yeah.
And as a result, because you don't have the money, you'll end up not paying it at all.
Yes, so I think the point that you're making, it's possible, but it needs to be in advance and not paid off. So like you say, if you calculate that you might have to pay Zakah 10,000 rand and you have 2,000 rand, call it liquid at the moment, and the cash flow is 2,000, and your whole is not due yet, but you want to benefit from the month of Ramadan and you pay that 2,000 rand, when your date is, let's use the example of Muharram, which will still come in 3-4 months' time, then you have to pay the 8,000. But importantly, when you pay the 2 now in Ramadan to benefit from it, you have to make the niyyah that this is for my Zakah, which is only due at my whole, let's say it's Muharram. And then when Muharram comes and the 8 is exactly your correct calculation, you then pay the balance. But the benefit of that is obviously you have, number one, benefited from the reward, and number two, your cash flow in Muharram, so it's only 8 then, and some people might not necessarily have the liquid cash because some of their wealth is investments and they don't like cashing in on the investments. So it's easier then if you have 8,000 rand cash to pay in the balance, because it's due on that at that time, and not necessarily touch your investments or cash in, depending on obviously.
Well, I'll tell you what, Yasmina, thanks for amplifying all of this. I think it's particularly important, and for want of a better word, what is Zakah? It's the Allah tax. So I think we get that, right? Direct me to one contact number or a website that I can alert to people to right away. And I'm going to ask you then on the back of this interview to perhaps tag myself and Salam Media on various social media platforms with links to SANZAF.
Yes, so importantly, Ashraf, we have different numbers for our 8 different offices around the country. So instead of giving that to the listeners right now, I think it's best just to give you our website, because all of those numbers are on the website. And it's easy to remember our website, www.sanzaf.org.za. And I think what's important also on that website is how you can make your donations. It's also important for people to find out what the fitra and the fidya amounts is for the month of Ramadan for the various regions, because it is different from the different regions.
Okay, got that. So sanzaf.org.za, I got that right. Yasmina Francke, the CEO of the South African National Zakah Fund, absolutely playing an important role in amplifying the need to pay your, I'm going to say it again, your Allah tax. It just sounds a bit more different than just calling it Zakah, which obviously is defined in the Quran, and I certainly get that. Yasmina, thanks for your time. Assalamu alaikum.
Always a pleasure. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you. Well, there you are. So from one aspect of what defines you as a Muslim to another important issue that's happening in France, the run-up for an election. And interestingly, so much of that election is being fought not just on French issues, as you would call it, and the concerns of the country, but on how voters are defined by their relationship with Muslims. Now, does that make any sense? We're going to find out in a moment.